22. Mama Datte was the grandson of Guapago, and he got on well most of the time. But one time he lost his temper. This is how it was. There were several horses in a pasture, and Mama Datte wanted to get them out. A fence ran all the way around, and there was just one gate. There was a lot of ground inside. He could not get those horses out. One of them led the others. Every time they were driven up to the gate, that one wheeled and ran as fast as it could to the other side. Well, that went on for a long time, and Mama Datte burned up. He ran to the house and got his bow and arrows. The horses were running in single file, and he shot at the one that was causing all that trouble. He missed, though, and the arrow went deep into the neck of the second horse. In the winter of 1852 to 1853, a Pawnee boy who had been held as captive among the Kiowas succeeded in running away. He took with him an especially fine hunting horse, known far and wide as Guadal Seyu, Little Red. That was the most important event of the winter. The loss of that horse was a hard thing to bear. Years ago there was a box of bones in the barn, and I used to go there to look at them. Later someone stole them, I believe. They were the bones of a horse which Mama Datte called by the name Little Red. It was a small bay, nothing much to look at, I have heard, but it was the fastest runner in that whole corner of the world. White men and Indians alike came from far and near to match their best animals against it, but it never lost a race. I have often thought about that red horse. There have been times when I thought I understood how it was that a man might be moved to preserve the bones of a horse, and another to steal them away. The sketch: the arrow went deep into the neck. 23. Aho remembered something, a strange thing. This is how it was. The Taimi bundle is not very big, but it is full of power. Once Aho went to see the Taimi keeper's wife. The two of them were sitting together, passing the time of day, when they heard an awful noise, as if a tree or some other very heavy object had fallen down. It frightened them, and they went to see what on earth it was. It was Taimi. Taimi had fallen to the floor. No one knows how it was that Taimi fell. Nothing caused it, as far as anyone could see. For a time Mama Datte wore one of the grandmother bundles. This he did for his mother, Kia de Ninekeke. He wore it on a string tied around his neck. Also remembered this, that if anyone who wore a medicine bundle failed to show it the proper respect, it grew extremely heavy around his neck. There was a great iron kettle which stood outside of my grandmother's house next to the south porch. It was huge and immovable, or so I thought when I was a child. I could not imagine that anyone had strength enough to lift it up. I don't know where it came from. It was always there. It rang like a bell when you struck it, and with the tips of your fingers you could feel the black metal sing for a long time afterward. It used to catch the rainwater with which we washed our hair. 24. East of my grandmother's house, south of the pecan grove, there is buried a woman in a beautiful dress. Mama Datte used to know where she is buried, but now no one knows. If you stand on the front porch of the house and look eastward towards Carnegie, you know that the woman is buried somewhere within the range of your vision. But her grave is unmarked. She was buried in a cabinet, and she wore a beautiful dress. How beautiful it was! It was one of those fine buckskin dresses, and it was decorated with elk's teeth and beadwork. That dress is still there, under the ground. Aho's high moccasins are made of softest cream-colored skins. On each instep there is a bright disk of beadwork, an 8-pointed star, red and pale blue on a white field, and there are bands of beadwork at the soles and ankles. The flaps of the leggings are wide and richly ornamented with blue and red and green and white and lavender beads. East of my grandmother's house the sun rises out of the plain. Once in his life a man ought to concentrate his mind upon the remembered earth, I believe. He ought to give himself up to a particular landscape in his experience, to look at it from as many angles as he can, to wonder about it, to dwell upon it. He ought to imagine that he touches it with his hands at every season and listens to the sounds that are made upon it. He ought to imagine the creatures there and all the faintest motions of the wind. He ought to recollect the glare of noon and all the colors of the dawn and dusk. Epilogue. During the first hours after midnight on the morning of November 13th, 1833, it seemed that the world was coming to an end. Suddenly the stillness of the night was broken. There were brilliant flashes of light in the sky, light of such intensity that people were awakened by it. With the speed and density of a driving rain, stars were falling in the universe. Some were brighter than Venus. One was said to be as large as the moon. The most brilliant shower of Leonid meteors has a special place in the memory of the Kiowa people. It is among the earliest entries in the Kiowa calendars, and it marks the beginning, as it were, of the historical period in the tribal mind. In the preceding year, Taimyr had been stolen by a band of Osages, and although it was later returned, the loss was an almost unimaginable tragedy, and in 1837 the Kiowas made the first of their treaties with the United States. The falling stars seemed to image the sudden and violent disintegration of an old order. But indeed the golden age of the Kiowas had been short-lived, 90 or 100 years, say, from about 1740. The culture would persist for a while in decline until about 1875, but then it would be gone, and there would be very little material evidence that it had ever been. Yet it is within the reach of memory still, though tenuously now, and moreover it is even defined in a remarkably rich and living verbal tradition which demands to be preserved for its own sake. The living memory and the verbal tradition which transcends it were brought together for me once and for all in the person of Kosan. 100-year-old woman came to my grandmother's house one afternoon in July. Aho was dead. Mama Datte had died before I was born. There were very few Kiowas left who could remember the sun dances. Kosan was one of them. She was a grown woman when my grandparents came into the world. Her body was twisted and her face deeply lined with age. Her thin white hair was held in place by a cap of netting, though she wore braids as well, and she had but one eye. She was dressed in the manner of a Kiowa matron, a dark, full-cut dress that reached nearly to the ankles, full, flowing sleeves, and a wide apron-like sash. She sat on a bench in the arbor, so concentrated in her great age that she seemed extraordinarily small. She was quiet for a time. She might have almost been asleep, and then she began to speak and to sing. She spoke of many things, and once she spoke of the sun dance. My sister and I were very young. That was a long time ago. Early one morning they came to wake us up. They had brought us a great buffalo in from the plain. Everyone went out to see and to pray. We heard a great many voices. One man said that the lodge was almost ready. We were told to go there, and someone gave me a piece of cloth. It was very beautiful. Then I asked what I ought to do with it, and they said I must tie it to the Taimyr tree. There were other pieces of cloth on the tree, and so I put mine there as well. When the lodge frame was finished, a woman, sometimes a man, began to sing. It was like this: "Everything is ready. Now the 4 societies must go out. They must go out and get the leaves, the branches for the lodge. and when the branches were tied in place, again there was singing. Let the boys go out. Come on, boys, now we must get the earth. The boys began to shout. Now they were not just ordinary boys, not all of them. They were for whom prayers had been made, and they were dressed in different ways. There was an old woman. She had something on her back. The boys went out to see. The old woman had a bag full of earth on her back. It was a certain kind of sandy earth. That is what they must have in the lodge. The dancers must dance upon the sandy earth. The old woman held a digging tool in her hand. She turned toward the south and pointed with her lips. It was like a kiss, and she began to sing. We have brought the earth. Now it is time to play. As old as I am, I still have the feeling of play. This was the beginning of the sun dance. The dancers treated themselves with buffalo medicine, and slowly they began to take their steps. And all the people were around, and they wore splendid things, beautiful buckskin and beads. The chiefs wore necklaces, and their pendants shone like the sun. There were many people, and oh, it was beautiful. That was the beginning of the sun dance. It was all for Time, you know, and it was a long time ago. It was, all of this and more, a quest, a going forth upon the way to Rainy Mountain. Probably Kosan too is dead now, and times in the quiet evening I think she must have wondered, dreaming, who she was. Was she become in her sleep that old purveyor of the sacred earth, perhaps that ancient one who, old as she was, still had the feeling of play? And in her mind at times did she see the falling stars. Rainy Mountain Cemetery. Most is your name, the name of this dark stone, deranged in death, the mind to be inheres forever in the nominal unknown. The wake of nothing audible he hears, who listens here, and now to hear your name. The early sun, red as a hunter's moon, runs in the plain. The mountain burns and shines, and silence is the long approach of noon upon the shadow that your name defines, and death this cold, black density of stone.